The hardest part about integrations is you're usually working across two domains, finance and sales, for instance, and usually they're not talking the same language.
There's a lot of work that folks have to do, even if they are tech forward, to be able to even help human beings improve their forecasting.
We should get this information. When should we get this information? How do we capture that information?
Automation and the efficiency is probably secondary to the visibility that you guys got from finding patterns around disputes and refunds and actually improving the business.
When I talk to CFO, it's definitely not the thing that they like the most. Hi everybody to a new episode of CFO Stack. Today we have with us, as always, Jason. Jason, thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And our special guest today, Joe Blanchett. Joe, how are you doing? Welcome to the pod.
Doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me on here.
Awesome. So first of all, Joe, we like to start with a quick intro of your background. I saw you were in Michigan studying engineering. Now you have finished in finance. So if you could share a little bit how it's been all that journey, maybe from the beginnings, from where you're from all the way to this point today.
Yeah, for sure. I like you said, I graduated Michigan with an industrial operations engineering degree. So I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. I somehow got into software implementation post-grad for a supply chain software company called Manhattan Associates, and that's where I kind of got my hands dirty with things like SQL and solution development lifecycle and change management and working with clients and software. I spent about 2 years there in Atlanta. I moved to Netsuite after that, which is a company you're probably familiar with. Finance technology was a new kind of category for me, but I liked it a lot more than supply chain. So that was in 2016. Mm-hmm. And soon after that, Oracle bought Netsuite, and all of the consulting companies started blowing up their Netsuite practices. So Deloitte was one of those companies. I joined Deloitte sometime soon after Oracle bought Netsuite. I found myself in sort of the high growth tech company world, implementing NetSuite for small, high growth tech companies, and I really liked it. There's a lot to do, really exciting companies to work with, and I got a similar sort of opportunity to go do that at SeatGeek, and I was SeatGeek's first finance systems specialist in 2018, and I've kind of grown into senior manager of business systems at that point, or at this point.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that, Joe, that you really liked implementing NetSuite. At least in my experience, when I talk to CFO, it's definitely not the thing that they like the most. So what are kind of the things that you enjoyed in there, or made you decide that could be an interesting career path for you?
I think part of it was honestly my distaste for supply chain. It was kind of a breath of fresh air, if you will, like going from like physical sort of inventory, tracking these boxes. I think at one point I was on the shop floor, like scanning boxes and figuring out like what messed up in the supply chain software. So NetSuite, obviously, you're not dealing with a lot of that. I mean, depending on what kind of company you are, you might be. But, I found myself working for a lot of like high growth internet companies, e-commerce sort of companies, where you're really dealing with a technology based product and not a physical product. So I kind of like that. NetSuite as a tool, though, I think is such a customizable, extensible platform that you can really do some creative things with Suite Cloud, and they have a great kind of like set of APIs to work with, and integration is something that really interests me, and finance is kind of a landing pad for anything that means anything significantly financially for a company. So you kind of get this interesting view working in a platform that is your general ledger of the entire company's operations, because at the end of the day, you have to interpret that and service it in an income statement. So I like the integration aspect of it, and I kind of like that financial view, holistic view of a company.
Great. So, for example, now at SeatGeek, you were in charge of the financial systems, right? And now you're in charge of all general business systems. So, what's exactly the difference, or what other systems are you in charge of right now to have that holistic view, except from the ERP and the accounting, of course? What are all these other systems in the business?
Yeah, so like I said, I started off as our first finance systems expert. Um, my first experience there was with NetSuite, Coupa, and Kariba, so kind of our core finance stack, and started integrating a lot of things into NetSuite, things like Salesforce and Workday and stuff like that. And, my next kind of stop in my career growth was integrations. Took over our integration platform, Workato, one of the best tools we have at SeatGeek, and then became kind of a manager of business systems, and now as of earlier this year, I also look after go-to-market and support. So that's the Salesforce, the Zendesk, and the whole ecosystem that comes with that.
And this type of integrations, I mean, normally they're not very easy. For example, if you want to connect NetSuite to Salesforce, Workday, there's always some unexpected challenges, right? What are kind of the biggest problems that you have to face in these integrations?
Yeah, I don't think integrations are technically that difficult. I find that the the hardest part about integrations is you're usually working across two domains, finance and sales, for instance, and usually they're not talking the same language. Like what one team expects to happen is completely different from what the other team might expect is happening. So a lot of the troubles you end up running into are not like technical challenges at all. They're actually like organizational and process problems that you end up finding when you're doing technical like integration implementations.
Okay. How do you overcome these challenges? Are more like people related challenges, or what's kind of the strategy in there to make the implementations go live as soon as possible?
Well, you got to think about, what's the goal here? Uh, what's the goal we're trying to accomplish? And if there's something out of alignment, you know, how do we get everyone aligned to ultimately achieve whatever goal you're trying to achieve? So, I mean, if you're just trying to put new clients in Salesforce into NetSuite, and there are certain uh, you know fields that the finance team wants to be included, but those fields simply don't exist in Salesforce, then it's a gap, and you have to figure out where to solve it, right? So it becomes a conversation between sales and finance. Who should get this information? When should we get this information? How do we capture that information? And, you're doing a little bit of process re-engineering almost every time you try to build an integration. So you got to make sure you're building an integration that is, facilitating a good process as well.
I think to kind of add to that, right? The example I think of, you mentioned customers, right? You may have a customer in your CRM, and you may want to move that over to NetSuite. Let's talk about address. Well, is it the bill to address? Is it the headquarters address? Is it an address of the ship to contact? It's like folks are just like, I just want the customer and the address in here. It's like, yeah, but when you start breaking down what that actually means, I think that's the governance aspect that you're talking about and really understanding the problem. And all of a sudden, something on the surface seems simple, and actually it's quite complex to even define, let alone integrate.
Yeah. Yeah, so you got to ask the right questions, right? Anytime you do an implementation or an integration, you got to ask those questions like what address, what type of address, how does that address get entered? Um, there's a curious business systems analyst usually produces high impact projects because they're the ones who are going to ask the meaningful questions and get to the root of how we solve a problem.
I'm curious. I assume you've implemented many times NetSuite, and probably people might be questioning like how long can it take to go live with a NetSuite implementation from starting the implementation all the way to be up and running. What's kind of the average?
I haven't implemented NetSuite as a new system in a very long time. I've been at SeatGeek for over 5.5 years now. But my answer to that would probably be the implementation doesn't stop, right? Like your go live date is just the beginning, and you're doing constant optimization, continuous optimization after that. NetSuite and really all business system projects are they're really products that you can improve over time. They're not projects that have a completion date. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, you had experience lately with implementing NetSuite?
I've done some fixing of some NetSuites and some re-implementations. Those 3 months minimum is usually the time. From scratch, the fastest I've ever seen is about the same, probably 3 to 4 months before go live. And that's not NetSuite as an ERP. That's NetSuite as like the financial hub. NetSuite as an ERP, I think you're talking probably measured in quarters, not in months, and probably even more than a year, frankly, for a lot of folks.
Great. So, Joey, once you have connected, let's say, the NetSuite with Salesforce plus your own platform data, Workday, whatever the other systems are, what's kind of the output that you manage to get from there that is different from having these systems without speaking to each other?
Well, for us at SeatGeek, it's sort of like we put all the pieces in place back in 2018, 2019, the Coupa, the NetSuite, Kariba, Salesforce. None of them talked to each other, and if they did, they didn't do it very well. Um, so you kind of start simple, and you get more advanced over time. I think back to when we were closing the books, it was taking us a very long time to close the books at in 2018. And I think about where we are now, 7 days, 8 days, whatever it is. It's a very reasonable um, close timeline within our finance team. That sort of progress comes with that kind of continuous optimization mentality that I was talking about. Like, what's the biggest bottleneck? What's the most manual thing that we do now? What process do we really hate, right? You go after those kind of uh, high impact opportunities and you automate them, right? We're an automation first company. So what you get by tying all these systems together and automating processes is better data, better reporting, faster reporting. You can close the books quicker. Everyone's life gets a little bit better because they're not doing sort of the mundane work. We do have a value at SeatGeek, don't do BS work. And if I smell something that seems like BS work, I try to figure out, one, should we actually be doing this in the first place? And two, okay, how do we automate it?
Could you share an example of a PS work that you've recently changed?
I could, yeah. There's a lot of really good examples, um, and we can talk. I'm probably full of them, but the first one that comes to mind, if we just think about customer, right? I remember back in 2018 when we signed a new client, finance didn't hear about it until we needed to invoice them, right? Like, hey, we got to invoice this customer. What customer, right? Like now, fast forward to today, we sign a new client. they're in Salesforce immediately, right? Or they're in NetSuite from Salesforce immediately. Things are automated. The other one, maybe a slightly more complex, was we're a company that we sell tickets and we recognize revenue in the month of sale, but we know that some percentage of those tickets we're going to incur chargebacks on, we're going to incur refunds on. So we have to estimate refunds and chargebacks, and we have to accrue for them in the month of sale. And looking at what the accounting team was doing, a few years ago, with pulling all the refunds, pulling all the sales, pulling all the event dates, doing all of this stuff separately, and then doing what I call Excel magic, which is all these VLOOKUPs and all of these different formulas within Excel. Maybe Excel crashes once or twice along the way to finally produce a refund rate that can be historical refund rate that can be used in your refund accrual calculation. That is a good example of BS work. So what did we do? We have a data warehouse system specific to finance, where we did all of the data aggregation, joining of different tables, and we just produced the refund rate automatically. Now it's as easy as going to a table, finding the refund rate for the months you're interested in, and using that as your input. And so that's the type of BS work we want to eliminate.
And I would almost venture to say the automation and the efficiency is probably secondary to the visibility that you guys got from finding patterns around disputes and refunds and actually improving the business. Because to your point, most of those folks that are capable of solving those other higher level problems didn't have time to do that because they were tracking down all the reporting. So now by automating it, you not only freed up the time and effort it took for them to do that, maybe some risk too. Well, now they're actually adding value in a different way. And I think honestly, that's probably the most overlooked aspect of automation, particularly finance and accounting, is, all of a sudden revenue isn't actually a revenue. You have to estimate some sort of a clawback. Well, for certain customers and cohorts, I suspect you guys have certain ones that are worse than other, and that may inform pricing decisions and other decisions that have a 7-8 figure impact, not a 6-figure automation impact.
Yeah, I mean, automation is all about up leveling the people within your organization. Remove them from the BS work, automate that, automate the tedious, mundane tasks so they can focus on the strategy, the insights. What should we use this data for? And to your point about data, Jason, having all of that data in a place where it can be analyzed and accessed to inform those strategic decisions is a key thing that we're always trying to do for all sorts of financial data.
I saw, Joe, you passionate about AI. Where do you think it's going to impact in this data management?
I think AI is. I'm very bullish on AI. So I think about automation in sort of 3 phases. You have the kind of old school legacy version 1 of automation, which was RPA, right? You're scraping screens and you're training this bot to do the screen scraping exactly how the user taught you to do it. And the second phase of automation was all API driven, right? So all of these systems have APIs. We have iPaaS tools like Workato that can orchestrate API calls together in a way that just produces some amazing output that helps accelerate or completely automate end-to-end business processes. But there's still those really hard to reach places for API-based automation. I'm thinking like, how do you interpret an unstructured body of text from a customer that it's trying to tell you, I want to know what my open balance is, or did you invoice me for this, or you have a SOC 1 report that you're analyzing for one of your financial system vendors, and you want to extract all the meaningful data out of there. APIs alone can't really help you automate in those places, but phase 3 of this automation sort of trajectory that we're on is really like, how do you infuse AI into your business processes and your SaaS ecosystem to automate the things that you couldn't previously automate before?
Interesting. Jason, your thoughts in these three steps?
Yeah, I think I generally agree. Working backwards, I would totally agree that there's stochastic and probabilistic use cases that AI is totally equipped to tackle. And I think you nailed the biggest one, which is customers asking contextual questions around their account, et cetera, and trying to get information. Well, it's both better for the customer if they have an AI answer because they get it faster. It's also better internally because you don't have customer service reps answering the same, surface level questions over and over again. That's not exactly a very fulfilling job in a lot of ways. Part of what I would say, like the layer 2 that you mentioned, Joe, I think the API absolutely. It's I would say data movement itself has been productized, and Workato is probably the best example of that. I think there's probably still one more step to go in the sense that getting all the data in one place and moving the data is one part of it. I think then creating this like relational integrity, but not from a technical perspective, is a bit what's missing. So let's use finance as an example, right? Like you have orders from certain places and you have payments and invoices from certain places, 2 or 3 databases. And yeah, those have APIs, and you could absolutely have iPaaS plus some data engineering and bring that in one place. That's just the data movement. What you didn't do is translate that into like a business concept. For example, what's actually my revenue, which is different than my selling price. And it feels like that stage is where most people are missing. And I think that stage 2 is actually the building block for being able to apply, probabilistic type of models like, generative AI against those things. But to your point, I think the chatbot example for CS, great use case. One, because all that data is in one place and it's a bunch of unstructured conversations that's easy to go read, highly transactional, one place. This finance data, not so much, right? Like we can go and we can move the data, but to your point, like we have to now translate this into a meaningful way of almost like relating this in an order to cash type of business structure. Now, a couple years from now you're primed to solve these probabilistic type of, not how's my account doing as a customer, but how's my business doing as an analyst. And that feels like we're, a couple steps away in some sense. And then working back from RPA, I totally agree. I've always hated RPA because it lacked what you said earlier, which was a process reengineering. And you said it best. I think that's where a ton of the value is. It's like just replacing the button clicks is not really thinking through the problem enough to have an impact. And, I think that's why a lot of these RPA projects outside of, accounts payable, I have 10,000 invoices. I'm with you. RPA can make sense if there's truly no source data. If there's source data, though, I think that's a data automation problem in part 2.
Yeah, I think we're early on in like what can AI do for finance, and I laid out what I think is probably summarizing content, generating new content is probably some low-hanging fruit, but I think we're going to have different waves of this AI era, and what we ultimately want to get to is where you have a single pane of glass and you can say, how is my business doing? What should I look into? What are what's my forecast for the next 3 years, right? And we're a long ways away from AI being able to do that, but I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah, well, I think AI could do that today if we had all of our data in one place with the right business context. But to your point, you guys are continuously improving and investing in these things, and there's always a little bit more to do there. And that's a hard problem to solve because it's not just A to B. And I think integration is probably insufficient of a word if you just mean data movement. It's almost more of a translation than an integration in a lot of ways. An integration being, sure, you pass the customer back and forth between NetSuite and Salesforce, asynchronous integration. But like something's happening in my business, whether or not a customer is paid and their behaviors, and then translating that into a financial statement, yeah, that's a different beast.
Yeah, you got to build. It's definitely not A to B, like you say, right? You got to go from A to B to C to D, and you got to hit each step before you can really get all the way to the end. So, you got to start with the processes, the data movements, the automation, and use that as the foundation for launching into some of these more like advanced AI initiatives. Because you do have to have highly organized data in a way that makes sense for the AI to do anything meaningful with it.
Yeah, exactly right.
How about predictions? What do you think the landscape looks like for ERP and GL predictions in 5 or 10 years from here?
Like forecasting type predictions, or do I have any predictions about the landscape?
Well, both questions will be great to know, but just like forecasting predictions with using GL and ERP data.
Yeah, I mean, I asked this question to some of our internal finance folks. When do we just have a automatically AI generated forecast, right? When do we get to that point? 10 years, 5 years? I don't know. It's tough to say, but we're at the point where we're infusing AI technology into or a lot of SaaS platforms like NetSuite and the other ERPs are trying to figure out how to infuse AI into their product. NetSuite came out with their first batch of AI enhancements, and one of them is like text enhance. Okay, so you'll generate me an email. That's great, but that's not a automatically generated forecast, right? So I think that everybody's still kind of trying to figure it out, right? And there's some new players that are entering the market. There was this pretty cool article that Gartner posted about cool vendors in finance, right? And I think MindBridge Analytics was one, Auditoria was one. I think there was like one more, but I don't know how this whole thing is going to end up shaking out. You have new vendors entering the market. You have the incumbents trying to figure out how to get AI into their platforms, and we don't really know how it's going to play out yet. But everyone's going to keep doing things, and we'll kind of see what sticks and who wins.
Jason, what your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll decompose it into kind of two buckets. One, I think existing, like a forecasting an existing book of business, like your existing customers with like who's going to retain, if you're recognizing revenue over time. I've seen some use cases of folks that are using large language models to help predict what's actually going to happen for an existing book, which I would call one half of forecasting. So I think we're pretty close where like the early adopters are starting to do that if they haven't already done that. For the, let's call it like the 5-year forecast for like you're forecasting marketing spend you haven't spent to customers that you don't have. Yeah, it feels like we're a bit away from being able to have someone with, enough, the depth of data to be able to train a model to do that. And the benefit of being able to forecast an existing book is LLMs need tons and tons and tons of data. You can't have thin data and have a good prediction. You need really dense data. But if you're just doing this like 5-year forecast, like what exactly are you training it on? Like historical months of the company? There's just really not enough, atomic data to train a model, in my opinion, on that one. And honestly, that's where some of this human judgment replacement comes in, and it feels like that's a couple steps removed from where we are. So that's the limiting factor.
Yeah.
Also yeah, Joe, go ahead.
And I think you start small. Like we're deploying sort of like short-term GTV forecasts, but that's just GTV and it's just short-term, right? How do you get to that, entire business forecast, not just GTV, not just revenue, but how do you forecast your whole business over the course of 5 years? We're quite a ways away from being able to do that from a system standpoint, and just our company is ready. Do they have the data in a place where you could use it as input for something like that?
Yeah. When you made me think of something too, to your point, like the readiness aspect. Part of that readiness aspect is if you're trying to forecast your financial statements. And if your financial statements are overly aggregated, and you don't have the ability to disaggregate them into the right cohorts, that again is a blocker of these probabilistic type of things, which is the forecast. So to your point, yeah, I think there's a lot of work that folks have to do, even if they are tech forward, to be able to even help human beings improve their forecasting from what is usually an aggregated ledger that they're applying some factor to, frankly.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more about like having the data available at a granular level and classified at the levels that you want it to be classified at. That's that A to B kind of foundational aspect that you have to have nailed before you can do any sort of like meaningful forecasting or anything more advanced, right? You got to build the foundation, and when you talk about like revenue data uh, and stuff like that, you really have to get really detailed with with how you're classifying your lowest level of revenue. One thing we did in the last year or so is I think we had like three revenue classes before we classified revenue for, and we blew that out with an automated kind of revenue system uh, to like 25 different classes with a hierarchy and everything like that. And that level of detail would have not been possible had we not used automation to do all that data classification and journal entry posting. It's just not possible to do by hand.
Perfect. Great. Jason, Joe, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Joe, thank you very much for joining,
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
and see you next week. Have a great day.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Alex. Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Bye bye.